The widow's needle caught the candlelight as she pushed it through the torn fabric, her fingers working methodically despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. And outside the small cabin window, the Wyoming territory stretched dark and endless under a sky thick with stars in the summer of 1878. Sarah Mitchell had been alone for 8 months now, ever since the fever took her husband Thomas and left her with a modest homestead, a handful of chickens and debts she could barely comprehend. At 24 years old, she had become intimately familiar with loneliness, with the weight of survival pressing down on her shoulders every waking moment. The pile of mending beside her belonged to the ranch hands from the neighboring property, the sprawling Double R Ranch owned by Robert Randall, a cattle baron who employed nearly 30 men. Sarah had taken to mending their clothes for a few coins per item, working late into the night after she finished her own chores, after she fed the chickens and tended the small vegetable garden and hauled water from the creek that ran along the eastern edge of her property. Her back ached from hunching over the work, and her eyes burned from squinting in the dim light, but she could not afford to stop. The bank man had come by last week, his suit too fine for the dusty Wyoming landscape, his words polite but firm. She had 3 months to make good on Thomas's debts, or the property would be forfeit. 3 months to come up with $200, a sum that seemed as impossible as lassoing the moon. The knock at the door startled her so badly she pricked her finger with the needle. A drop of blood welled up and she pressed it against her apron as she stood, her heart hammering. No one came calling this late, not honest folk anyway. She had Thomas's rifle by the door and she picked it up with hands that trembled only slightly before calling out. "Who is there?" "Name is Cole Brennan, ma'am. I work for the Double R. One of the boys mentioned you do mending work and I have a shirt that needs attention." Sarah hesitated, then opened the door a crack, keeping the rifle visible. The man on her porch was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build that spoke of years of hard work. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty denim trousers and a work shirt, a wide-brimmed hat pushed back to reveal dark hair and eyes that were a startling shade of gray in the candlelight spilling from her doorway. He looked to be in his late 20s, weathered by sun and wind but undeniably handsome in a rugged, unpolished way. Most notably, he held his hands away from the gun belt at his waist, making it clear he meant no threat. "It is late," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes, ma'am, I apologize for that. I just rode in from moving cattle to the north pasture. Been gone 3 days. Got a torn shirt that I need for the church social this weekend, and I heard you do fine work." He offered a slightly sheepish smile. "I can come back tomorrow if that suits you better." Something in his manner put her at ease, perhaps the genuine apology in his tone or the way he kept a respectful distance from her door. Sarah found herself lowering the rifle slightly. What happened to the shirt? Caught it on barbed wire, tore a good gash along the sleeve and sighed. "It is my best shirt, truth be told." He pulled the garment from where he had it tucked under his arm, holding it out for her inspection. Sarah opened the door a bit wider, reaching for the shirt. The fabric was good quality cotton, dark blue, and the tear was indeed substantial but clean. She could mend it so the repair would barely show if she used careful stitches. "I can have it ready by Friday." "I would be much obliged, ma'am. What do I owe you?" 50 cents. Cole Brennan nodded, then his gaze drifted past her to the interior of the cabin. She saw his eyes widen slightly as he took in the enormous pile of mending stacked on her table. The candle burned low, the way she had one hand pressed to the small of her back as though it ached. Something shifted in his expression, a look she could not quite read. "That is a considerable amount of work," he said quietly. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassed to have her circumstances so plainly observed. "I manage just fine." "I am sure you do, ma'am. I did not mean to suggest otherwise." He tipped his hat to her. "Friday then, Friday." She watched him walk back to his horse, a handsome bay gelding that waited patiently at her fence. He mounted with easy grace and rode off into the darkness, and Sarah closed the door, setting the rifle aside and returning to her chair by the candle. She added his shirt to the pile and picked up the work she had been doing before his interruption, but found her mind wandering to the cowboy with the gray eyes and the gentle manner. The week passed in its usual rhythm of relentless work. Sarah rose before dawn to feed the chickens and collect eggs, some of which she sold in town at the general store. She tended her garden, pulling weeds and watering the rows of beans and squash and potatoes that would help see her through the winter. She hauled water and chopped wood and cleaned the cabin and cooked simple meals, and every spare moment she spent with needle and thread in hand, working through the pile of mending that never seemed to diminish. Friday arrived with a brilliant sunrise that painted the mountains to the west in shades of pink and gold. Sarah finished Cole Brennan's shirt just after breakfast, examining her work critically in the morning light. The repair was nearly invisible, the stitches small and even. She folded it carefully and set it aside, then spent the rest of the morning working on other projects. Cole arrived in the early afternoon, riding up to her cabin with that same easy grace she had noticed before. This time she saw him more clearly in daylight. He had a strong jaw, slightly crooked nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, and those remarkable gray eyes that seemed to see more than they should. When he smiled at her in greeting, she noticed he had a small scar through his left eyebrow. "Afternoon, ma'am, Mr. Brennan." Sarah retrieved his shirt and brought it out to the porch, handing it to him. "I hope the work is satisfactory." Cole unfolded the shirt, examining the repair closely. His eyebrows rose in appreciation. "This is excellent work. I can barely see where the tear was." He reached into his pocket and pulled out not 50 cents but a silver dollar, pressing it into her hand. "For the fine craftsmanship." "That is too much," Sarah protested, trying to hand back the extra coins. "It is exactly right," Cole said firmly but kindly. "You did excellent work and you should be paid accordingly." He folded the shirt and tucked it under his arm, then seemed to hesitate, as though considering whether to speak. Finally, he said, "Ma'am, I hope you do not think me forward, but I noticed you have a fence post that is leaning badly on the north side of your property. If you have no objection, I could come by Sunday after church and set it right. Would not take more than an hour." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain her independence and pride. But the fence post had been leaning for weeks, and she lacked both the strength and the proper tools to fix it herself. "I could not pay you." "I was not asking for payment, ma'am, just offering to be neighborly." She studied him, searching for any sign of ulterior motive, but found only genuine kindness in his expression. "That would be very helpful, Mr. Brennan. Thank you." "Cole, please, and you are Mrs. Mitchell, is that right, Sarah?" she found herself saying. "You may call me Sarah." His smile widened, transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "Sarah it is, then. I will see you Sunday." She watched him ride away again, and only after he disappeared from sight did she realize she was still standing on the porch, still holding the silver dollar in her hand and still smiling. Sunday morning, Sarah dressed in her best dress, a simple calico in a soft green that Thomas had always said brought out her hazel eyes. She pinned her brown hair up carefully and set her bonnet in place before walking the 2 miles into town for services at the small white church that served the scattered community. The congregation was never large, perhaps 40 people on a good Sunday, mostly ranch families and a few townspeople. Sarah sat in her usual spot near the back, nodding politely to her neighbors but keeping mostly to herself. She had learned in the months since Thomas's death that widowhood carried a complicated social position. Some of the married women regarded her with pity, others with suspicion, as though being alone made her a threat to their own marriages. The unmarried men either ignored her out of respect for her mourning, or paid her uncomfortable attention that made it clear they saw her primarily as a woman in need of a husband, any husband. She was surprised when Cole Brennan slid into the pew beside her just as Reverend Paulson began the service. He removed his hat, revealing his dark hair neatly combed, and he wore the blue shirt she had mended. It looked fine on him, she noted, fitting well across his broad shoulders. He caught her looking and gave her a quick, warm smile before turning his attention to the Reverend. Sarah found it difficult to concentrate on the sermon. She was acutely aware of Cole sitting beside her, of the clean scent of soap and leather, of the way his deep voice joined in the hymns with surprising melodic quality. Once, when they reached for the same hymnal, their fingers brushed, and she felt a jolt of something she had not experienced in a very long time, something she barely recognized as attraction. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the bright sunshine, several people stopped to greet Cole. It became clear to Sarah that he was well-liked and respected, that he had been working at the Double R for nearly 3 years and had earned a reputation as one of their best horsemen. He handled the social interactions with easy charm but kept gravitating back to Sarah's side, making it quietly clear that he was with her. Martha Henderson, the banker's wife and one of the town's most notorious gossips, approached them with a calculating gleam in her eye. "Why, Cole Brennan, I did not know you were acquainted with Mrs. Mitchell." "Yes, ma'am, Sarah does excellent mending work, fixed my favorite shirt just this week." He gestured to what he was wearing, his tone polite but firm, establishing Sarah's work as the reason for their acquaintance while simultaneously using her first name in a way that suggested a comfortable familiarity. Martha's eyebrows rose, but before she could probe further, Cole tipped his hat to her and gently touched Sarah's elbow. "I should get you home so I can take care of that fence post before it gets too late." They walked together to where his horse was tied, and Sarah felt the weight of multiple gazes following them. The attention made her uncomfortable, but Cole seemed unbothered, helping her up onto his horse before mounting behind her. It was the practical choice since she had walked to town, but the intimacy of sitting in front of him, of feeling his arms around her as he held the reins, made her pulse quicken. They rode mostly in comfortable silence, but as they neared her property, Cole said, "I hope I did not overstep back there with Mrs. Henderson. She has a reputation for meddling, and I thought it best to give her a simple explanation." "You did not overstep," Sarah assured him. "And you were right about her nature. By tomorrow, the whole town will know that you rode me home." "Does that trouble you?" Sarah considered the question. A few months ago, she would have said yes, would have been mortified by such attention. But she found that, with Cole, she did not much care what Martha Henderson and her ilk thought. "No," she said honestly, "it does not trouble me." She felt rather than saw his smile, sensed the pleasure in it. They reached her cabin and he dismounted first before helping her down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment they stood close together, and Sarah's breath caught at the intensity in his gray eyes. Then he stepped back, breaking the spell, and turned his attention to his saddlebags. "Let me get the tools and take a look at that fence." Sarah went inside and changed into her work dress, then brought out a pitcher of cool water from her well and 2 tin cups. She found Cole at the leaning fence post, examining it critically. He had removed his good shirt, working in just his undershirt, and she tried not to stare at the way the fabric stretched across his muscular arms and back. "The whole post has rotted through at the base," he called to her. "I will need to replace it entirely." "I noticed you have a few spare posts stacked by your barn. May I use one of those?" "Of course." She watched as he worked, impressed by his efficiency and skill. He dug out the old post, set the new one deep in the ground, tamped the earth firmly around it, and reattached the fence rails. It took closer to 2 hours than one, and by the time he finished, the sun was lowering toward the mountains and he was covered in dust and sweat. Sarah brought out the water and he drank deeply, thanking her. "That should hold for many years now." "I cannot thank you enough, Cole. This has been worrying me for weeks." He wiped his face with a bandana, studying her with an expression that was both kind and serious. "Sarah, I hope you do not think me inappropriate for saying this, but it seems to me you are carrying more burdens than one person should manage alone. Is there no one to help you? No family nearby? The question, asked with such genuine concern, brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them back quickly, embarrassed. My parents passed when I was 17. Thomas had a brother back in Ohio, but we have not corresponded in years. I manage well enough on my own. That pile of mending I saw the other night, that was not managing well enough. That was you working yourself to exhaustion. His voice was gentle but insistent. How much sleep are you getting, Sarah? When was the last time you had a full meal that was not just vegetable soup? She wanted to deflect, to maintain her pride and independence, but found herself unable to lie to him. Thomas left debts. The bank has given me until October to pay them off. The mending helps, but I am still short. How much do you need? That is not your concern. How much? She met his eyes, saw the determination there, and sighed. $200. Cole let out a low whistle. That is a considerable sum. He was quiet for a moment, thinking, what if I helped you? Not with money, he added quickly, seeing her start to protest, but with the work. You could take on more mending if you had help with the other chores. I could come by in the evenings after my work at the ranch is done, help with the heavy tasks. Chopping wood, hauling water, repairs that need doing. I could not ask that of you. You are not asking, I am offering. He stepped closer to her and his voice dropped lower, more intimate. Sarah, I am going to be honest with you. I noticed you months ago at the general store in town. You were buying flour, and you smiled at something the shopkeeper said, and I thought you had the prettiest smile I had ever seen. I have been trying to work up the courage to speak to you ever since. When I heard you did mending work, I near about invented reasons to need a shirt fixed just to have an excuse to come calling. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. You tore your shirt on purpose? No, that genuinely happened. But I have 3 other perfectly good shirts I could have worn to the church social. He smiled that transformative smile again. I am not trying to take advantage of your situation, and I will understand if you tell me no. But the truth is, I would like to spend time with you, to get to know you better. And if helping you with chores gives me that opportunity while also making your life a bit easier, well, that seems like something that benefits us both. No man had ever spoken to her with such open honesty, such direct expression of interest. Even Thomas, whom she had cared for deeply, had courted her with more traditional reserve. Cole's straightforwardness was both disarming and appealing. She found herself wanting to say yes, wanting to let him into her life, despite all the practical reasons she should maintain her distance. All right, she said softly, but on one condition. You let me feed you supper when you come by. It is only fair if you are working. His smile became a grin. That is a deal I am more than happy to accept. And so a new pattern began. Cole arrived every evening just as the sun started its descent, still dusty from his day at the ranch. He would immediately set to whatever task Sarah most needed done, approaching each chore with cheerful energy despite having already worked a full day. He chopped enough wood to see her through the winter, repaired her chicken coop so the hens were better protected from predators, fixed the leak in her barn roof, and hauled more water than she could have managed in a week. While he worked, Sarah prepared supper, cooking more substantial meals than she had bothered with in months. She made stews with beef when she could afford it, fresh bread, vegetable dishes from her garden. They ate together at her small table, and the cabin felt less lonely with his presence, with the sound of his voice and his laughter filling the empty spaces. After supper, Cole would sit with her while she did her mending. At first, he just kept her company, telling her stories about his life, about growing up in Texas and coming north to Wyoming to work cattle, about the other ranch hands at the Double R and the adventures they had moving herds across the vast open range. He had a gift for storytelling, a way of bringing scenes to life that made her laugh or gasp or lean forward in anticipation. Then one evening, about 2 weeks into their new arrangement, he picked up one of the shirts from her pile. Show me how to do this, the basic stitches at least. I am not good with a needle, but I can learn. Sarah was touched by the gesture, by his willingness to engage in work that most men would have considered beneath them. She demonstrated the simple running stitch, the backstitch, the way to make repairs that would hold under stress. Cole's first attempts were clumsy, his large hands struggling with the delicate work, but he persisted with good humor and determination. His stitches would never be as fine as hers, but he learned to do basic repairs, and his help allowed her to take on more complex projects that paid better. As the summer weeks passed, Sarah found herself increasingly drawn to Cole. She learned that he was 28 years old, that he had left Texas after his parents died within months of each other from cholera, that he sent money back to a younger sister who had married a shopkeeper in San Antonio. She learned that he loved horses with a passion that bordered on reverence, that he could gentle the most fractious Mustang with patience and kindness. She learned that he had a scar on his ribs from being gored by a longhorn steer, that he sang while he worked when he thought no one was listening, that he took his coffee black and had a weakness for apple pie. She learned that he was unfailingly kind, deeply honest, and looked at her in a way that made her feel beautiful even in her faded work dress with her hair escaping its pins and her hands rough from labor. One evening in late August, they sat together on her porch after supper, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was cooling after the heat of the day, bringing the scent of sage and prairie grass. Sarah had finished her mending quota early for the first time in weeks, thanks to Cole's help, and she felt relaxed in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. "I have been keeping accounts," she said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "With the extra mending I have been able to take on, and with selling more eggs since you fixed the chicken coop and the hens are happier, I am close to having enough for the bank. I might actually manage it by October." Cole turned to look at her, his expression pleased but tinged with something she could not quite identify. "That is wonderful news, Sarah. I am proud of you. I could not have done it without you." She met his eyes, wanting him to understand the depth of her gratitude. "Cole, you have given me so much. Your time, your labor, your companionship. I do not know how to thank you properly." He was quiet for a long moment, and she saw him wrestling with something internal, saw the moment he came to a decision. "Sarah, I am going to tell you something, and I want you to hear me out before you respond. Can you do that?" Her heart started to pound. "Yes." "That first night I came to your door, when I saw you sitting there by candlelight, working on that mountain of mending all alone, something in my chest just about broke. You looked so tired, so determined, so alone. And I thought, this is not right. This woman should not be carrying all this by herself." He shifted to face her more fully, his gray eyes intense in the starlight. "I told you I had noticed you before, that I thought you were pretty. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. Sarah, I have been half in love with you since that day at the general store. And spending these weeks with you, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your kindness and your fierce determination, I am not half in love anymore. I am completely, wholly, irrevocably in love with you." Sarah's breath caught. She had sensed his growing affection, had felt her own feelings deepening, but hearing him say the words with such raw honesty was overwhelming. Cole continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it has not been a year since your husband passed. I know people will talk, will say it is too soon. But I also know that life is uncertain, that we are not guaranteed tomorrow, and I do not want to waste time pretending I do not feel what I feel. I love you, Sarah. And I am asking if you might consider letting me court you properly, with an eye toward marriage when you are ready." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but these were not tears of grief or exhaustion. These were tears of joy, of relief, of something that felt remarkably like hope. "I loved Thomas," she said softly. "He was a good man, and I mourned him sincerely, but what I felt for him was a gentle, comfortable affection. It was not—" she paused, searching for the right words. "It was not like this. What I feel for you, Cole, it is so much bigger and brighter and more intense than anything I have felt before. It frightens me a little how much I have come to care for you in such a short time." "Is that a yes?" he asked, and she could hear the hope and vulnerability in his voice. "Yes." She laughed through her tears. "Yes, you can court me. Yes, I love you too. Yes to all of it." Cole let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob, and then he was reaching for her, pulling her into his arms. He held her carefully, as though she were precious and fragile, and she buried her face against his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her cheek. They stayed like that for a long moment, just holding each other under the vast Wyoming sky. When they finally pulled apart, Cole cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I promise you, Sarah, you will never have to work alone again. Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, we will face them together." Then he kissed her, and it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Sarah felt something inside her that had been tightly clenched for months finally relax, finally open. She was not alone anymore. She was loved, and she loved in return, and that changed everything. The courtship that followed was the talk of the territory, but Sarah found she did not care about the gossip. Cole made his intentions clear to everyone, escorting her to church each Sunday, sitting with her at community gatherings, helping her with her property in full view of any neighbor who cared to look. There was no subterfuge, no shame, just honest affection openly displayed. Robert Randall, Cole's employer, made a point of visiting Sarah one afternoon in early September. She was in her garden when the older man rode up, and she wiped her hands on her apron nervously. Randall was in his 50s, a successful rancher with a reputation for being tough but fair. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, dismounting and approaching her with his hat in his hands. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Randall. Is there something I can do for you? Actually, I came to speak with you about Cole Brennan." He smiled at what must have been alarm on her face. "Nothing bad, I assure you. Cole is one of my best men, and I would hate to lose him. But I am also a practical man, and I can see which way the wind is blowing. When you two marry, and I am assuming that is the plan, you will need a better setup than this small homestead." Sarah bristled slightly. "My homestead may be small, but it is mine." "I meant no disrespect, ma'am. What I came to propose is this. I have a foreman's cottage on the Double R that sits empty. It is larger than your cabin, has good land around it for a garden and chickens and the like. If Cole agrees to stay on as my head horseman, a position I have been meaning to offer him anyway, you two could live in that cottage. It comes with the job, along with a fair salary that would support a family comfortably." Sarah was stunned by the offer. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it. Talk it over with Cole. I am not trying to pressure you, but I wanted you to know the option is there. Cole is like a son to me, and I want to see him happy. It is clear that you make him happy, Mrs. Mitchell." After Randall left, Sarah sat on her porch steps, her mind whirling. The offer was generous, almost too generous, but she also understood the practicality of it. Her small homestead, even free of debt, would be a difficult place to raise a family. The foreman's cottage would offer them a better start, better prospects. When Cole arrived that evening, she told him about Randall's visit. He listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do, Sarah? This is your land. If you want to stay here, we will make it work." "I have been thinking about it all afternoon," Sarah said slowly. "This place, it represents my life with Thomas, and that was important, and I will always honor his memory. But it is not the future I want. The future I want is with you, Cole. And I think Mr. Randall's offer could give us a good foundation to build that future on." Cole's face broke into a wide smile. "Then I will accept his offer, but Sarah, there is something I need to do first, something I should have done already." He dropped to one knee right there on her porch, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "This was my mother's ring. My father gave it to me before he died, told me to give it to the woman I would love for the rest of my life. Sarah Mitchell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Sarah felt fresh tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes, Cole. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, and then swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed breathlessly. When he set her down, he kissed her with more passion than before, and she responded in kind, feeling desire bloom warm and urgent inside her. They decided on a simple wedding in late September, giving Sarah just enough time to pay off the bank debt and make arrangements for her property. She would keep the homestead, renting it to a young couple newly arrived in the territory who needed a start. The rent money would provide a small additional income. The night before the wedding, Sarah lay awake in her cabin, thinking about all that had changed in just a few short months. She had gone from desperate and alone to loved and partnered. She had found a man who saw her not as a burden or a convenience, but as an equal, a companion, a partner in every sense of the word. The wedding took place in the same small white church where she had sat beside Cole that first Sunday. Sarah wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself, working late into the night to make it perfect. Cole wore a new suit, dark and well-fitted, and the look on his face when he saw her walking down the aisle made her knees weak. Reverend Paulson conducted the ceremony with warmth and sincerity. When it came time for the vows, Cole's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. Sarah's voice shook with emotion as she made the same promises, meaning every word with her whole heart. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her thoroughly, earning cheers and applause from the congregation. They walked out of the church hand in hand, into a brilliant autumn afternoon, and Sarah felt as though her life was truly beginning for the first time. The foreman's cottage on the Double R was everything Randall had promised and more. It was a sturdy structure with 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen with a cast iron stove, a sitting room with a fireplace, and a covered porch that looked out over rolling grassland toward the mountains. There was a barn for Cole's horses, a chicken coop already stocked with hens, and rich garden soil that Sarah immediately began planning for the next spring. Their first night as husband and wife, Cole carried her over the threshold as tradition dictated, then set her down gently in the middle of their new sitting room. The house was furnished simply but comfortably, and someone, probably several of the ranch wives, had stocked the kitchen with supplies and left wildflowers in jars around the rooms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan," Cole said softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Mrs. Brennan." Sarah smiled at the sound of it, at the way it marked her new identity, her new life. She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you, Cole Brennan. I love you, Sarah Brennan." He kissed her gently, then with increasing passion, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She had been married before, she was not ignorant of what happened between husband and wife, but with Thomas it had been dutiful and brief, more obligation than pleasure. With Cole, it was entirely different. He took his time, lavishing attention on her, making her feel cherished and desired in equal measure. He was gentle but passionate, attentive to her responses, and when they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness that made Sarah's eyes sting with happy tears. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, and Sarah felt a deep contentment settle over her, a peace she had never known before. The months that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. She settled into the rhythms of the ranch, getting to know the other families who lived and worked on the Double R property. The ranch wives welcomed her warmly, including her in their weekly sewing circles and church activities. Sarah continued to take in some mending work, but now it was by choice rather than desperate necessity, and she could be selective about the projects she accepted. Cole thrived in his new position as head horseman. He had a gift for training the young horses that came through the ranch, gentling them with patience and skill. Sarah loved to watch him work, loved the way he moved with such confidence and grace, the way the horses responded to his calm voice and steady hands. In the evenings, they would sit together on their porch, talking about their days, making plans for the future. Cole wanted to eventually have his own small horse ranch, breeding and training horses for sale. Sarah encouraged the dream, helping him save money toward that goal. Their first Christmas as a married couple was a joyful affair. Sarah decorated their cottage with pine boughs and holly, baked pies and cookies, and knitted Cole a warm scarf in a deep blue that matched his favorite shirt. He gave her a beautiful music box that played a waltz and a pair of sturdy boots that would be perfect for working in the garden. On Christmas night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside their warm cottage, Sarah told Cole the news she had been holding close for the past week. "I am with child," she whispered. "The baby should come in late summer." Cole's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He pulled her close, his hand splaying protectively over her still flat belly, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked her, as he told her how happy she had made him, as he promised to be the best father he could possibly be. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Sarah bloomed with health, her cheeks pink and her energy high. Cole fussed over her constantly, insisting she not overwork herself, bringing her little treats from town, talking to her growing belly as though the baby could already hear him. In late August of 1879, almost exactly a year after Cole had first knocked on her door and seen her mending clothes by candlelight, Sarah went into labor. The ranch women rallied around her, with Martha Calloway, the most experienced midwife in the territory, attending the birth. Cole paced outside the bedroom, too nervous to be still, until Martha finally called him in. "Come meet your son," she said with a wide smile. Sarah, exhausted but glowing with joy, held their newborn baby against her chest. The infant had a thick shock of dark hair, and when he finally opened his eyes, they were the same startling gray as his father's. Cole approached slowly, reverently, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch his son's tiny fist. "He is perfect," Cole whispered, his voice breaking. "You are amazing, Sarah. Absolutely amazing." They named him Thomas Cole Brennan, honoring both Sarah's first husband and his father. Little Thomas, as they called him, was a healthy, robust baby with a strong set of lungs and his father's appetite. Sarah took to motherhood with the same determined grace she brought to everything, though she was grateful beyond measure for Cole's hands-on involvement. He was not like so many fathers who considered child care to be exclusively women's work. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, sang lullabies in his deep voice that usually soothed the baby when nothing else would. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic with a baby in the house, but full of joy. Sarah had never imagined she could be this happy, that life could feel this full and rich and meaningful. She thought sometimes of those desperate months after Thomas Sr. had died, of sitting alone by candlelight with her pile of mending and her mountain of worries, and marveled at how much had changed. When little Thomas was 6 months old, Cole came home one evening with an unusual expression on his face, something between excitement and nervousness. They had just put the baby down for the night, and Sarah was washing the supper dishes when Cole approached her, gently taking the plate from her hands and setting it aside. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, leading her to sit at their kitchen table. Sarah felt a flutter of concern. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. In fact, something might be very right if you agree with me." He took her hands in his thumbs rubbing over her knuckles in a soothing gesture. "You know I have been saving money toward eventually having our own place, our own horse ranch." "Yes, of course." "Well, old Henry Jacobson, who has the property about 5 miles north of here, he is getting too old to manage his place anymore. His children all moved back east, and he has no one to leave it to. He approached me today with an offer. He would sell me his property, 200 acres with good grazing land, a creek running through it, a decent barn and a house that needs some work but is structurally sound. He is asking a fair price, and with what we have saved plus a small loan from the bank, we could afford it." Sarah's heart started to pound with excitement. Cole, that is wonderful. There is more. Mr. Randall has offered to be my first major customer. He wants me to breed and train horses for the ranch, guaranteed contracts for at least 5 years. It would give us a steady income while we build up our own business. He paused, studying her face. But it would mean leaving this cottage, leaving the security of my position here. It would be a risk, Sarah, and we have a son to think about now. I would not do this unless you were fully in agreement. Sarah thought about it for only a moment. She thought about Cole's dream, about the way his face lit up when he talked about training horses, about building something of their own. She thought about their son, about giving him a legacy, land that would be his someday. I think we should do it, she said firmly. I believe in you, Cole. I believe in us, and I think we can make this work. The relief and joy on Cole's face was beautiful to see. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. We are going to build something amazing together, Sarah. I promise you that. They moved to the Jacobson property, which they renamed the Brennan Horse Ranch in the spring of 1880. The house did indeed need work, but with help from friends at the Double R and in town, they repaired the roof, fixed the windows, and made it comfortable. It was smaller than the foreman's cottage had been, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. Cole threw himself into the work with passionate intensity. He started with 6 horses, a mix of Greenbroke Mustangs and a couple of quality mares he purchased for breeding. Sarah watched him work with them daily, amazed by his patience and skill. He had a way of reading horses, of understanding what they needed that bordered on uncanny. Sarah managed the household and the garden, cared for Thomas, and also took on the business side of the ranch, keeping careful accounts, managing correspondence with potential customers, tracking bloodlines and training progress. She discovered she had a head for business, an organizational skill that complemented Cole's horsemanship perfectly. By the end of their first year on the ranch, Cole had trained and sold 8 horses, earned a reputation for quality work, and had a waiting list of customers. The guaranteed contracts with the Double R provided stability, but word of mouth brought in additional business from other ranches, and even some buyers from as far away as Colorado and Montana. In the fall of 1881, Sarah found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was more difficult than the first, with morning sickness that lasted well into the second trimester and fatigue that sometimes left her barely able to function. Cole worried constantly, insisting she rest more, taking on additional household tasks without complaint. 2-year-old Thomas was a handful, full of energy and curiosity, but Cole managed to keep him entertained and out of trouble while also maintaining the horses. Their daughter was born in May of 1882, a tiny, delicate baby girl with Sarah's hazel eyes and a surprisingly full head of reddish-brown hair. They named her Emily Rose, and if Sarah had thought Cole was devoted to their son, it was nothing compared to his reaction to having a daughter. He was absolutely besotted, spending hours just holding her, talking to her in soft voices, marveling at her tiny fingers and toes. Little Thomas, not quite 3 years old, was initially confused by the new baby but quickly became protective of his little sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding times. Life was full and busy and sometimes overwhelming, but Sarah thrived on it. She had never imagined this kind of life for herself, this kind of happiness. On summer evenings, she would sit on their porch with Emily nursing at her breast and Thomas playing at her feet while Cole worked with a horse in the nearby corral, and she would feel gratitude so profound it was almost painful. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By 1884, Cole had expanded to 20 horses and hired 2 young men to help with the training and daily care. They built a larger barn and added corrals and a proper breaking pen. Sarah convinced Cole to add a chicken business as well, raising and selling chickens and eggs to provide additional steady income. They also expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. Sarah was pregnant again, And while they did not know if this baby would be a boy or a girl, they wanted to be prepared for their growing family. Their third child, another son they named Jonathan Robert after Cole's father and their friend Robert Randall, was born in the winter of 1885. He was a robust baby, bigger than either of his siblings had been, with a lusty cry that proclaimed his presence to the world. With 3 children under 5, life was chaotic. Sarah sometimes felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work required to keep the household running, to keep everyone fed and clothed and cared for. But Cole was an equal partner in every way, never complaining about being woken in the night or about the endless demands of parenthood. One evening, after they had finally gotten all 3 children to sleep, Sarah and Cole collapsed onto their porch swing, exhausted but content. Sarah rested her head on Cole's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Do you ever think about that night I first came to your door?" Cole asked quietly. "When you were sitting there alone, mending clothes by candlelight?" "I think about it often," Sarah admitted. "It feels like a different lifetime now, like that was a different person, not me. You told me once that you had been afraid of how intensely you felt about me, that it was bigger and brighter than anything you had felt before. Do you still feel that way?" Sarah lifted her head to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the genuine question. "Cole Brennan, I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I loved you desperately then. Every day with you, every challenge we have faced together, every joy we have shared, it has only made my love for you deeper and stronger. You are my partner, my best friend, the father of my children, and the love of my life. So yes, I still feel that way, only more so." Cole kissed her, deep and tender and full of emotion. "I love you, Sarah. You and our children, you are everything to me. Everything I do, everything I build, it is all for you." They sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the distant call of an owl. Sarah thought about how far they had come, how much they had built together, and felt a deep sense of peace and satisfaction. The years continued to pass, marked by the steady growth of both their family and their ranch. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved the horses almost as much as his father did. Emily was spirited and adventurous, constantly getting into mischief, but charming her way out of trouble with her infectious laugh. Jonathan was steady and sweet-natured, the peacemaker among the siblings. In 1887, Sarah gave birth to their 4th child, another daughter they named Margaret Ann, called Maggie by everyone. She was a quiet baby, content to observe the chaos around her with wide, solemn eyes. The Brennan Horse Ranch had become one of the most respected operations in Wyoming territory. Cole's horses were known for their intelligence, their good temperament, and their excellent training. Buyers came from across the West to purchase Brennan horses, and Cole was able to command premium prices. With success came the ability to make improvements and investments. They built a proper house, a 2-story structure with 6 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a formal dining room and parlor, and even an indoor pump for water. It was a far cry from the small cabin where Sarah had sat alone mending clothes, and she never took it for granted. They hired help as well, a young woman named Lucy to assist with the household and children, and several ranch hands to help Cole with the horses. Sarah found that delegating some of the domestic work allowed her more time to focus on the business aspects of the ranch, which she genuinely enjoyed. In the spring of 1889, when Thomas was 9, Emily 7, Jonathan 4, and Maggie 2, Sarah discovered she was pregnant for the 5th time. She was 35 years old now, and this pregnancy felt more difficult than the previous ones. She was tired more often, her back ached constantly, and there was a heaviness to her body that worried both her and Cole. When she went into labor in January of 1890, it was clear quickly that something was wrong. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 2 days. The midwife looked increasingly worried, and Cole, allowed in the room because Sarah refused to let him leave, held her hand and prayed more fervently than he had in his entire life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, their fifth child was born, another son. But the baby was small and weak, his cry thin and reedy. The midwife worked frantically to clear his lungs to get him breathing properly, while Sarah, barely conscious from exhaustion, reached out weakly for her child. Cole brought the baby to her, this tiny, fragile little boy, and Sarah held him against her chest, tears streaming down her face. "He needs to be strong," she whispered, "like his father." They named him Samuel James, and for the first few weeks of his life, no one was certain he would survive. He was too small, struggled to nurse, and seemed to lack the vitality of their other children. Sarah barely left his side, coaxing him to eat, keeping him warm, willing him to live with every fiber of her being. Cole was terrified. He could see the toll the difficult birth and the worry over Samuel was taking on Sarah, could see her growing thinner and more exhausted. He tried to insist she let Lucy help more, but Sarah was adamant about caring for the baby herself. Finally, Robert Randall, still a good friend despite Cole no longer working directly for him, sat Cole down and spoke frankly. "You need to get your wife to see a doctor in Cheyenne. That birth was hard on her, and she is not recovering the way she should. The baby will be fine. Lucy is perfectly capable of caring for him for a few days, but Sarah needs medical attention." Cole knew Randall was right. He convinced Sarah, though she resisted, to make the journey to Cheyenne, leaving Samuel in Lucy's capable care with detailed instructions. The older children, under Lucy's supervision and with help from some of the ranch wives, would manage. In Cheyenne, the doctor examined Sarah thoroughly and delivered news that was both concerning and clarifying. The difficult birth had caused internal damage. Sarah could recover, but she needed rest, proper nutrition, and no more pregnancies. Another pregnancy, the doctor warned gravely, would likely kill her. The news hit both of them hard. They had not necessarily planned on more children, but having the choice taken away was painful. More concerning was the immediate issue of Sarah's health. She needed to rest and recover, but with 5 children, including an infant, how was that possible? They returned to the ranch, and Cole made a decision. He promoted one of his most trusted ranch hands to foreman, delegating much of the daily horsework. He hired another woman to help Lucy with the household and children, and he insisted, over Sarah's protests, that she focus on recovering her health. It took months. Sarah, who had always prided herself on her strength and capability, struggled with feeling useless, with watching others care for her children and manage her household. But slowly, with proper rest and good food and Cole's unwavering support, she regained her strength. Samuel, too, gradually became stronger and healthier, growing into a small but sturdy little boy with his mother's determination and his father's quiet strength. By the summer of 1890, life had settled into a new normal. Sarah had learned to accept help, to delegate tasks, to prioritize her health. Cole had learned that he could trust others to help with the ranch. That success did not require him to do everything himself. And their children, ranging from Thomas at 10 down to Samuel at 6 months, were thriving. One evening in late summer, Cole found Sarah sitting on their porch, much as she had been sitting on the porch of her tiny cabin all those years ago. But instead of mending clothes by candlelight, she was simply sitting, watching the sun set over the mountains, a cup of tea in her hands and a peaceful expression on her face. Cole sat beside her, taking her hand. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Sarah said softly. "How different my life is now from what I ever imagined it could be. How grateful I am for you, for our children, for this life we have built together." "It has not been easy," Cole said honestly. "We have faced challenges, hard times, moments when I wondered if we would make it through." "But we did make it through," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "Together. Just like you promised that first night, I have never had to work alone again. You have been beside me every step of the way, sharing the burdens and the joys equally." Cole brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "You are the strongest person I know, Sarah Brennan, and I am honored to walk through this life with you." They sat together as the sun completed its descent and the stars began to emerge, and Sarah felt a deep contentment settle over her. Her life had not been easy, had not been without pain and struggle and fear. But it had been rich and full and meaningful, filled with love and purpose and partnership. The years continued to unfold. Thomas grew into a young man who shared his father's love of horses and his mother's business acumen. At 16, he was already managing some of the horse training himself, showing a natural gift that made Cole's chest swell with pride. Emily, at 14, was courting the attention of several young men in the territory, much to Cole's dismay and Sarah's amusement. She had her mother's practical nature, but also a romantic streak that led her to dramatic declarations and passionate opinions about everything. Jonathan, at 11, was the quiet observer, the child who noticed everything and forgot nothing. He loved to read and showed an interest in the law, talking about maybe going back east for university someday. Maggie, at 9, was the ranch's unofficial veterinarian, forever rescuing injured animals and nursing them back to health. And Samuel, despite his rough start, had grown into a robust 7-year-old who feared nothing and approached life with infectious enthusiasm. The ranch continued to prosper. By the mid-1890s, the Brennan Horse Ranch was known throughout the West. Cole had successfully bred several bloodlines that were in high demand, combining the stamina of Mustangs with the refinement of thoroughbred horses. They employed 15 people full-time and had built a substantial operation. But success had not changed the fundamental nature of Cole and Sarah's relationship. They were still partners in every sense, still best friends, still deeply in love. They made decisions together, supported each other through challenges, celebrated each other's victories. In 1895, when Sarah turned 41 and Cole was 43, they celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary with a rare trip alone together, leaving the children in the care of Lucy and Thomas. They traveled to Denver, staying in a fine hotel, attending theater performances and dining in elegant restaurants. It was a taste of a different kind of life, sophisticated and urban, and while they enjoyed the novelty, they were both happy to return to their ranch, to their children, to the life they had built. One evening after their return, as they prepared for bed, Sarah studied her reflection in the mirror. She was no longer the young widow who had mended clothes by candlelight. There was silver threading through her brown hair now, lines around her eyes and mouth. Her hands were rough from years of work despite having help, but she did not feel old. She felt vital and alive and still deeply engaged with life. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and meeting her eyes in the mirror. "What are you thinking?" "That I am getting old," Sarah said with a slight smile. "We are getting old together," Cole corrected. "And you are just as beautiful to me now as you were the day I married you. More so, even, because now I see not just your lovely face but the years we have shared, the life we have built, the children we have raised. You are beautiful to me, Sarah, in every way that matters." Sarah turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. His dark hair was heavily streaked with gray now, his face more lined, but his gray eyes were still the same, still looking at her with that intensity that made her breath catch. "I love you, Cole Brennan, more than words can express." "I love you, Sarah. Always have, always will." They kissed, and then moved to their bed and made love with the comfortable familiarity of long partnership but also with genuine passion. Their physical relationship had evolved over the years but remained important to both of them, a way of connecting and expressing what words sometimes could not. As the new century approached, the Brennan family prepared for changes. Thomas, now 18, announced his engagement to Catherine Walsh, the daughter of a rancher from the neighboring territory. The wedding was planned for the spring of 1899, and Sarah threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm. She was going to be a mother-in-law, and if things progressed naturally, perhaps a grandmother before too long. Emily, at 16, was being courted seriously by Michael Thornton, a young lawyer who had recently opened a practice in the nearest town. Sarah liked the young man, appreciated his respectful manner, and the way he clearly adored her daughter. The younger children were still finding their paths, but Sarah and Cole had no doubt they would all find their way in the world. They had been raised with love and discipline, with encouragement to follow their passions and the security of knowing their parents would support them. Thomas's wedding in the spring of 1899 was a joyous affair, attended by friends and family from across the territory. Sarah watched her eldest son pledge his life to Catherine and felt tears streaming down her face, though whether they were from sadness at her baby growing up or joy at seeing him so happy, she could not say. Probably both. Cole squeezed her hand, and when she glanced at him, she saw tears in his eyes too. They shared a look of perfect understanding, of parents watching their child take the next step into adulthood, of pride and bittersweetness and love. As the new century dawned, the Brennan Horse Ranch stood as a testament to what could be built through partnership, dedication, and love. Cole was now recognized as one of the premier horsemen in the West. His opinion sought after, his horses commanded top prices. Sarah had become a respected businesswoman in her own right, managing the financial aspects of the ranch with skill and acumen. But more important than the business success was the family they had created, the love they had nurtured. Thomas and Catherine welcomed their first child, a son named Cole Thomas Brennan, in the spring of 1900, making Sarah and Cole grandparents for the first time. Holding that tiny baby, Sarah thought about the circle of life, about how she had once been a desperate young widow and was now a grandmother, secure and loved and surrounded by family. Emily married Michael Thornton in the fall of 1901, and the couple moved to Denver, where Michael's law practice was growing. Sarah missed her daughter but was happy to see her settled with a good man who loved her. Jonathan, at 17, announced his intention to attend university back east to study law like his brother-in-law. Sarah and Cole supported his dream, proud of his ambition even though it meant he would be far from home. Maggie, at 15, was still rescuing animals and had decided she wanted to study veterinary medicine, a highly unusual ambition for a young woman, but one that Sarah and Cole encouraged. If their daughter wanted to be a veterinarian, they would help her achieve that goal. Samuel, at 11, was still the adventurer, the risk-taker, the child who kept them constantly on their toes with his schemes and dreams. In 1903, when Sarah was 49 and Cole was 51, they sat together on their porch one evening, watching the sun set much as they had countless times over the years. Their hair was mostly gray now, their bodies showed the wear of years of hard work, but they were still healthy, still active, still deeply engaged with life and each other. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "The path your life took when you knocked on my door that night?" Cole turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "Not for a single moment. Meeting you, marrying you, building this life with you, it has been the greatest adventure of my life. Every challenge we faced together. Every victory we celebrated together. You are my partner, my love, my everything, Sarah. I would not change a moment of it." Sarah smiled, blinking back tears. "I feel the same way. That night when you saw me mending clothes by candlelight and told me I would never have to work alone again, you changed my life. You gave me partnership, love, family, purpose. You gave me everything I did not even know I needed." Cole took her hand, bringing it to his lips in the gesture he had repeated thousands of times over the years. "We gave each other everything, Sarah. That is what real love is. Not one person saving another, but two people choosing to walk through life side by side, sharing burdens and joys equally." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Sarah leaned her head on Cole's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, solid and steady as it had been for 25 years. She thought about the young widow she had been, alone and afraid, working by candlelight with the weight of the world on her shoulders. She thought about the man who had seen her, truly seen her, and had offered not just help but partnership. She thought about the family they had created, the life they had built, the love that had sustained them through every challenge. And she thought about how blessed she was, how grateful, how deeply, profoundly happy. Her life had not been without pain or struggle, but it had been full of love and meaning and purpose. She had been loved by a good man, had raised children who were finding their own paths in the world, had built something that would endure beyond her own life. The years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. Thomas and Catherine gave Sarah and Cole 3 more grandchildren, 2 daughters and another son. Emily and Michael had twin girls. Jonathan returned from university with his law degree and opened a practice in Cheyenne, eventually marrying a schoolteacher and starting his own family. Maggie, defying social conventions, pursued her veterinary studies and became one of the few female veterinarians in the West, eventually taking over much of the animal care for the ranch. Samuel, true to his adventurous nature, spent several years traveling before finally settling down, marrying a rancher's daughter from Montana and starting a horse ranch of his own. Sarah and Cole watched their children grow and succeed, watched their grandchildren arrive and begin to grow, and felt profound satisfaction in the legacy they were creating. The Brennan Horse Ranch continued to thrive, with Thomas gradually taking over more of the daily operations as Cole, now in his 60s, began to slow down slightly. But even as they aged, the bond between Sarah and Cole remained as strong as ever. They were rarely apart, still preferred each other's company to anyone else's, still reached for each other in the night, still found joy in simple moments together. In 1915, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered for a massive celebration at the ranch, dozens of people filling the house and spilling out onto the grounds. There was music and dancing, abundant food and laughter, and toast after toast honoring the couple who had built so much. When it was Cole's turn to speak, he stood with Sarah's hand in his and looked out at the assembled family and friends. 40 years ago, I knocked on a cabin door and saw a woman sitting alone, mending clothes by candlelight. I told her that night that she would never have to work alone again, and I have spent every day since trying to keep that promise. Sarah Brennan is the strongest, most capable woman I have ever known. She did not need me to rescue her. What she needed was a partner, and I have been honored to be that partner. Every success I have had, every bit of happiness I have experienced, it has been because of her, with her, through her. She is my love, my life, my everything. Here is to 40 more years. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Sarah, laughing through her tears, stood to kiss her husband. "You cannot promise 40 more years," she whispered against his lips. "We will be over 100 years old. Then we will be the oldest, most stubborn, most in love married couple in Wyoming," Cole whispered back, and they both laughed. The celebration continued late into the night, and when everyone had finally left or settled into the guest rooms, Sarah and Cole walked slowly out to their porch, both moving a bit stiffly now, both leaning on each other slightly. They sat in their favorite spot, the porch swing that Cole had built years ago, and looked out over the ranch. In the moonlight, they could see the barns, the corrals, the fields where horses grazed peacefully. They could see the lights from Thomas and Catherine's house at the far edge of the property, could hear the distant sound of one of their grandchildren laughing. "We did good, did we not?" Sarah said softly. "We did better than good," Cole replied, pulling her close. "We did amazing." They sat together in comfortable silence, an old married couple who no longer needed words to communicate, who understood each other perfectly after 40 years of partnership. Sarah thought about that terrified young widow, alone with her pile of mending and her crushing debts and her desperate loneliness. She thought about the cowboy who had seen her, who had offered not pity but partnership, not charity but love. She thought about every moment between then and now, every challenge faced and overcome, every joy celebrated, every sorrow shared. And she thought about how love, real love, the kind of love she and Cole had built, was not just a feeling but a choice made new every single day. It was choosing to be partners even when it was hard, choosing to support each other even when you were tired, choosing to celebrate each other's victories and comfort each other's defeats. It was work, constant work, but work that was rewarded 1,000 times over in moments just like this one. "I love you, Cole Brennan," Sarah whispered into the night. "I love you, Sarah Brennan," Cole replied, his voice as full of emotion as it had been on their wedding day. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They sat together as the moon traced its path across the sky. Two people who had found each other against the odds, who had built a life and a love that would endure as a legacy for generations to come. They sat together as they had sat together for 40 years, as partners, as lovers, as best friends, as two halves of one whole. And when they finally rose to go inside, to their bed where they had shared 40 years of nights, they walked hand in hand, still choosing each other, still loving each other, still grateful for that moment long ago when a cowboy had seen a woman mending clothes by candlelight and had promised she would never have to work alone again. A promise kept, a love honored, a life well lived together. Years continued to unfold with the gentle persistence of the Wyoming seasons. Sarah and Cole, now in their 70s, had settled into a quieter rhythm of life. They no longer managed the day-to-day operations of the ranch. That responsibility had passed fully to Thomas. But they remained involved, offering advice when asked and enjoying watching the next generation take the reins. Their days were filled with simple pleasures now. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Walks around the property, moving slowly but still enjoying the fresh air and the familiar landscape. Visits from children and grandchildren, and increasingly great-grandchildren, tiny bundles of energy that made them both laugh and remember when their own children had been that small. Sarah's health had remained relatively good, though arthritis had settled into her hands, making the fine needlework she had once excelled at difficult. Cole's joints ached more than he liked to admit, and he had lost some of the hearing in his left ear from years of working around horses. But overall, they were blessed with better health than many people their age. They talked often about their life together, reminiscing about early struggles and later triumphs, about their children's milestones and their own adventures. These conversations were important to both of them, a way of honoring the life they had built, of ensuring the memories remained vivid and real. One afternoon in the spring of 1920, Sarah was sitting on the porch, a quilt across her lap, though it was not particularly cold. Cole was beside her, reading the newspaper with his spectacles perched on his nose. They heard the sound of a wagon approaching and looked up to see Thomas driving up with several of the grandchildren bouncing excitedly in the back. "Grandma, Grandpa." The children tumbled out before the wagon had even fully stopped, racing toward the porch with the fearlessness of youth. Sarah laughed, opening her arms to embrace them. There were hugs and kisses and a jumble of excited voices all trying to talk at once. Thomas approached more sedately, a smile on his face as he watched his children swarm his parents. "They have been begging to visit all week," Thomas said. "I hope we are not intruding." "You are never intruding," Cole said firmly, ruffling the hair of his youngest grandson, a boy of about 6 who looked remarkably like Thomas had at that age. "Family is always welcome." The afternoon passed in joyful chaos. Sarah told stories about when their father was young, much to the children's delight and Thomas's mock embarrassment. Cole took the older grandchildren out to the barn to see the new foals, explaining bloodlines and training techniques with the patience of someone who genuinely loved sharing his knowledge. Later, after Thomas had gathered his children and departed, after the house had returned to its usual quiet, Sarah and Cole sat together again on the porch as the sun began to set. "Days like today," Sarah said softly, "I feel so wealthy." Not in money, though we have been blessed with that too, but in family, in love, in legacy. We did good work, you and I, Cole agreed. Built something that will last beyond us. Sarah turned to look at him, seeing the deep lines in his face, the age spots on his hands, the silver hair that had once been dark. But she also saw the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, saw the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his bearing, the love in his expression when he looked at her. "You remember what you said that first night?" she asked. "When you saw me mending clothes." "I said you will never have to work alone again," Cole replied immediately. "I remember every word of that conversation, Sarah. It was the night that changed my life." "You kept your promise," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Through everything, through every challenge and every joy, I have never been alone. You have been beside me, every single step." Cole reached over and took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years. "Being beside you has been the greatest privilege of my life." They sat together as the stars began to emerge, as they had sat together thousands of times over nearly 5 decades. And Sarah felt a deep peace, a certainty that whatever time they had left, whether it was days or months or years, they would face it together as they had faced everything, side by side. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Sarah and Cole celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1924 with another large gathering of family and friends. They were both 80 now, moving more slowly, tiring more easily, but still present, still engaged, still deeply in love. Cole's hearing had deteriorated significantly, and Sarah had to speak loudly for him to understand her. Sarah's arthritis had worsened, making many tasks difficult, but they adapted as they always had, finding new ways to communicate and care for each other. More great-grandchildren arrived, and then even a few great-great-grandchildren as their oldest grandchildren began having babies. The family tree had grown vast and complex, spreading across multiple states, but the ranch remained the heart of it, the place where everyone gathered for celebrations and holidays. One evening in the autumn of 1926, Sarah was not feeling well. She had been tired all day, and there was a persistent pain in her chest that worried Cole. He insisted on calling for the doctor, who came out from town and examined her carefully. "Her heart is weakening," the doctor told Cole privately. "At her age, this is not unexpected. Keep her comfortable, do not let her overexert herself. She could have days or years left, there is no way to know for certain." Cole thanked the doctor and saw him out, then returned to Sarah, who was resting in their bed. He lay down beside her carefully, mindful of her frailty, and she turned to him with a soft smile. "I heard what the doctor said," she whispered. "Do not look so worried, Cole. I have lived a long, wonderful life. I have no regrets." "I am not ready to lose you," Cole said, his voice breaking. "I cannot imagine life without you, Sarah." "You will not have to be without me for long," Sarah said gently. "We are both old, my love. Our time together in this world is drawing to a close, but what a beautiful time it has been." Cole gathered her carefully into his arms, holding her as he had held her countless times over their 50-plus years together. "I love you," he whispered fiercely. "I have loved you every day of our life together, and I will love you beyond whatever comes next." "I know," Sarah said peacefully. "And I love you, Cole Brennan. You are the great love of my life, the great adventure, the great joy. Thank you for seeing me that night, for promising I would never have to work alone again, for keeping that promise every single day since." They lay together in the gathering darkness, two old people who had loved each other well, who had built a life of meaning and purpose, who had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Sarah lived through the winter and into the spring of 1927. Cole rarely left her side, sleeping in a chair beside their bed, caring for her with the same devotion he had shown their entire marriage. Their children took turns staying at the ranch, wanting to be present, wanting to help care for their mother. On a beautiful May morning, with the windows open to let in the spring breeze and the scent of blooming flowers, with Cole holding her hand and their children gathered around, Sarah slipped peacefully away. She was 83 years old, and she died as she had lived the last 50 years of her life, surrounded by love and family. Cole was devastated. After more than 50 years of partnership, of constant companionship, the house felt unbearably empty without Sarah's presence. He moved through the days mechanically, accepting condolences, attending to necessary arrangements, but everyone could see that a part of him had died with Sarah. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the life Sarah had lived and the impact she had made. Emily gave a beautiful eulogy about her mother's strength, her kindness, her unwavering love for her family. Thomas spoke about his mother's business acumen and her partnership with his father, about how she had been a model of what marriage could be. Jonathan talked about her encouragement of his education, her support of his ambitions. Maggie spoke through tears about her mother's encouragement to pursue veterinary medicine despite social constraints. Samuel, the baby, now a man in his 30s with his own family, talked about his mother's fierce protectiveness, her endless patience, her unconditional love, and Cole, old and grief-stricken but determined, stood at the end and spoke simple words that captured everything. Sarah was my partner, my love, my life. She made me a better man, a better father, a better everything. I saw her mending clothes by candlelight one night, and I told her she would never have to work alone again. But the truth is, she was the strong one. She did not need rescuing. What we built together, as equals, as partners, as two people who chose each other every single day. I will miss her until my last breath. After the funeral, Cole returned to the ranch and tried to resume some normalcy. His children worried about him, tried to convince him to come live with one of them, but he refused. "This is my home," he said firmly. "This is where Sarah and I built our life. This is where I will stay." He took to sitting on the porch for long hours, in the spot where he and Sarah had sat together so many times. He would talk to her sometimes, telling her about his day, about the grandchildren's visits, about changes on the ranch. Some of his children worried he was losing his mind, but Thomas understood. "He is just missing her," Thomas told his siblings. "They were together for so long, they were a part of each other. Give him time." Cole lived through that summer and into the fall. He grew increasingly frail, eating little, sleeping poorly. The doctor said there was nothing specifically wrong with him other than age and grief, but everyone could see he was fading. On a cool October evening, Cole sat on the porch as he did every evening, wrapped in a quilt, watching the sun set. Thomas was with him, had taken to staying at the ranch most evenings to keep his father company. "She was there, you know," Cole said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "In that first moment when I saw her through the cabin window, I knew she was going to be important, that my life was about to change. I just did not know how much, did not know how completely she would transform everything." "She loved you very much, Pa," Thomas said gently. "She told me once that you saved her life." "No," Cole said firmly, "we saved each other. That is what real love does. It does not rescue, it partners. It does not save, it supports. Your mother and I, we built something beautiful together. Remember that, Thomas. When you look at this ranch, when you see what we created, remember it was built on partnership and love." "I will, Pa, I promise." Cole was quiet for a long moment, then he smiled, a real smile that lit his aged face. "She is waiting for me," he said softly. "I can feel it, not much longer now." Thomas felt tears sting his eyes but nodded. "Then you will see her soon." That night, Cole Brennan died peacefully in his sleep, in the bed he had shared with Sarah for more than 50 years. He was 82 years old, and he died with a smile on his face, as though he had seen something beautiful in his last moments. His children buried him beside Sarah, under a large cottonwood tree on a hill overlooking the ranch. The double headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates, and below, an inscription chosen by their children. "Partners in life, united in death, their love remains." The Brennan Horse Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and then under his son's management, and on down through the generations. The story of Cole and Sarah became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a tale of love and partnership, of promises kept and lives well lived. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the Wyoming mountains, and the breeze carries the scent of sage and prairie grass, people swear they can see two figures sitting together on the old porch, hand in hand, still choosing each other, still loving each other, still together as they had promised to be all those years ago when a cowboy had seen a woman mending clothes by candlelight and had told her she would never have to work alone again. A promise that had been kept, not just in life but beyond it, a love that had endured through every challenge and every joy, a partnership that had created a legacy lasting generations. The story of Cole and Sarah Brennan lived on, a testament to what could be built when two people chose to walk through life together, as equals, as partners, as two halves of one extraordinary whole.